Welcome back to part 2. In this installment, we're going to be covering subject isolation and detailing, and that's going to be achieved through dodging and burning in intertonal contrast. And then next, we're going to touch on color management, and this is going to be divided into two different categories. The first one is color fidelity, which is how we see and recognize colors, and the second part will be color memory, and that is how we tend to remember colors. So let's get straight into it. So when it comes to subject detailing, that for this particular photo, we're going to take the subject and we're going to break it into 3 individual parts. And the reason for that is if we look at the tonality and hues in the cheese, the crackers, and the cut side of this pear, they all share a very similar hue and tonal value. So therefore, any adjustments that we make, it will begin to bleed over and affect other areas of this image. Now, sometimes in food photography of where there is enough hue separation, such as greens, reds, and oranges, we can afford to just make one mask over the food and then handle each hue within. However, this photo, we don't have that luxury, so that's why we're going to break it into 3 subcomponents. So let's get started. So let's begin by creating 3 image layers. One for the pear, one for the cheese, one for the crackers. Now we're going to use the AI tools in Capture One. Pardon me, let me bring it up. Okay, that's looking pretty good, but we're now going to refine the mask. We'll just lower this value. So at 0 radius, the mask is baked in pixel by pixel. At 300, it now bleeds over and it's a very soft mask. So we're going to lower this to about 80%. That looks good to me. Apply. And the reason why we do that is because as we begin to adjust tonal values or exposure values within the subject, or perhaps the plate that it is within, there is the risk that we could create posterization, which is that white line that will form of where the contrast has become too great and the masks are just too refined, so it's creating that gap. So we will label this one pear so we don't lose ourselves as we go. We will now use the AI tools again. So next we'll create a new adjustment layer. We will use the AI tools. We will pick out the cheese. We will create a new adjustment layer. We will now pick out the crackers. So we will just quickly label these so we don't lose ourselves as we go along. Now that we have created the 3 masks, we're going to come into the color editor, more specifically the advanced color editor. And if we use this eyedropper and target the color of this pear, this crimson color, now Eterna and Pro Negative Standard have very good hue fidelity, but they do desaturate colors. So we need to restore the color fidelity of this pear. So we're going to increase it by 20 points. Now in transparency, before becoming a food photographer, I had many decades as a chef. So therefore, I have a lineage and a memory of what food colors should be. If you're new to food photography, by all means use an X-Rite color passport or whatever is going to help you achieve that hue fidelity. Because when the colors in food look off, it begins to look a little uncanny valley. Next, if we move to the cheese and we target that, this should be a creamy yellow. Now, as we can see, there's almost a little bit of a muddy color within this cheese. So the camera has captured the data accurately, but it's captured a broad range of the colors. So we need to restore its fidelity. So we're going to move this a little bit closer to the blue channel because it is a blue cheese. We're only going to make 7-8 points of movement. We're also going to increase the saturation by 10 points, but I'm also going to increase the lightness ever so slightly because it is sitting in the shadows. In fact, I might decrease that saturation back down to 5 and just lower this hue shift just a little bit. So that cheese is now looking lifelike and realistic to the day. If we now come into the crackers, and we target those, well, their color has been, hue, has been captured accurately as I remember it on the day. I will still increase saturation by 7-8 points because remember, saturation is a non-physical compositional tool. But I'm also going to lower their brightness by just 6 points. So therefore, let me get the correct cursor, I'm building intertonal contrast between the 3 subcomponents of what makes up the subject of this photo. So therefore, to my eye, we have now achieved correct hue fidelity. So we can put that color editor back. Now time to handle the subject of color memory. And that is, to define it in a nutshell, it's how people see colors and how people remember colors are often different. If you get somebody to look at a field full of flowers and then ask them to remember that, they will remember it as being more saturated than what it was. That our brains are continuously auto-correcting and adjusting our perception of the world to give us a consistent view. So this is often why at golden hour, people don't look orange. Their skin tones don't look orange. We can see that warmth and orangeness in the sky and in deflected light off of buildings, but we don't tend to see it in people's skin tones, etc., because our brain has edited it out. So that's why in wedding photography at golden hour shoots, they will purposefully increase the temperature of that photo to give that warm golden hour look. And that is because that is how people will tend to remember what that moment looked like, even though that's not how they perceived it in the moment. So we're now going to create a new field adjustment layer, and we're going to put it on the luma range. Now, if we remember from the histogram, the subject of this photo sat in the undertones, but before the midtones. So that is where we're going to dial in the luma range of this mask. We're going to graduate it a little bit. We're going to increase the radius, which will just soften the mask ever so slightly. And we're going to lower the sensitivity, which will also soften the edges of this mask. And we will click apply. If we come back to the exposure tools, in Capture One, the saturation slider is a smart tool. Therefore, it will increase saturation within different hues, but it will stop short of any one hue achieving color burn, but it will continue to saturate other colors which are still some distance from that color burn value, or the 255 value. So we're going to start increasing saturation, and I think 18 points is enough. That if people were to come dine at this restaurant, they were to order this dish and they were to remember this dish, this would be the colors that they would remember, and this would be the saturation level that they would remember. Now, if we go back to part one of this tutorial, saturation is also a non-physical compositional device, so therefore we want this area of the photo to be the most saturated. It doesn't necessarily have to be hypersaturated that in comparison to the rest of the image, but we want this to have the best color fidelity, the best level of saturation, but also the best color memory. So let's put this exposure tool away. Now, at this level of the photo, I don't believe dodging and burning is going to be needed for the cheese, nor is it for the cracker. It is this pear that has this partial teardrop shape and has the most texture in it. So we're going to create a new empty layer, and we are going to copy it from the pear layer. And we are going to apply that to a luma range. So if we just get in here a bit closer, we're going to lower the luma range to the blacks. We're going to drop it right down until we can just see the formation of this mask forming. We're now going to graduate it out. We're going to increase the radius to soften the mask. We're going to lower the sensitivity just a little bit. And we're going to click apply. We're now going to bring out the high dynamic range tool, where we can now lower the shadows. We can lower the black point just a small amount. And to me, that looks like a sufficient level of burn to this pear. So we will label that the burn layer. We can put the high dynamic range tool away. And we're now going to come into the style brushes. And what we're going to go for is into light and contrast. We're going to go into the dodge tool, and we're going to use this on a new layer. Now, as a young teen, I was an avid gamer, so I'm quite capable with a keyboard and a mouse, but a stylus would be infinitely more usable for this, so I'll leave that up to your discretion at what tools work best for you. And we're just going to go accentuate just the edge of this pear, because we're wanting to build dimension and texture to this pear. So if we now turn off that dodge layer, as you can see, it's very subtle. And if we come down to the burn layer, again, it's very subtle, but we're beginning to build dimension and shape into what is the focal part of this photo. So next, when it comes to color, we're going to create, let's get rid of that, we're going to create a new filled adjustment layer. We can now put the style brushes away, and we're now going to start working with the color balancing tools. So essentially, we are now going to start establishing a color grade. Now, when I look at this photo, I see a lot of these yellowy, slightly orangey hues. So let's just jump straight to the point. We're going to go straight for the blue channel. Now, the blue and orange or orange and teal color grade, it's very overplayed, but when it works, it works. So why swim against the current? So we're going to increase the blue, start lowering it down. So the big question is when is enough and when is it not enough? So if I come to this part of the photo, and let me get the right cursor, and I look at the umbra, the darkest part of the shadow, through to the penumbra, the lightest part of the shadow, I'm just looking for blue to appear somewhere within that graduation. So we'll quickly label this color grade so we don't lose ourselves. Next, we're going to come through to the midtones, and we're going to move through past the orange channel and beginning to enter into the yellow, because as established in the tone curves, we're going for a blue and yellow color grade. So again, let's increase it so it's at full strength. We'll begin to lower it down. And what I'm looking for in this photo is right here at the midtones in this wood and in the skin tones. Okay, I can begin to see it developing there. So that is a very good place, and we can always come back and adjust it. But what I'm going to do is lower the opacity down to, say, 85. Therefore, it's just subtle, because the color grading is what adds tone and emotion and feel to the image. But at the same time, the color grade can begin to affect hue fidelity. So we don't want to be creating unnatural colors within the food. And just to ensure that, what we are going to do is use an eraser brush with a very low flow, and we're just going to ever so slightly remove it from the food. A little bit still there, I can see, and in there. Now, to me, that looks nice, natural, and graduated. However, when it also comes to color fidelity and color memory, there's something else that I've picked up in this photo. So we'll come back to the style brushes, we'll close light and contrast, we'll open enhancement, and we're going to come to the red skin reduction. That there is a little bit of magenta in my hand. Now I'm just going to do this quickly. Obviously in real life you can take your time, but for the purposes of this tutorial we'll just get moving right along. So let's see how that looks. That looks a lot better. That we can still tweak this a little bit, but just to keep this moving at a good pace, we'll leave it at there for now. So that will conclude episode 2 of this tutorial, and in part 3 we will now come back and really begin to refine this photo so that it is now ready for professional publishing or for digital display for the world to see. I look forward to seeing you all again in part 3.